The morning air in Oakhaven holds a metallic, biting chill, the kind that settles deep into the marrow. An ancient oak tree, gnarled and thick with moss, stands as a silent witness to a scene that defies the town's quiet reputation. A man is pinned against its bark, not by rope, but by a series of precise, industrial-grade steel spikes driven through his wrists and ankles. His eyes remain fixed on the horizon, unseeing, while the forest floor around him remains suspiciously undisturbed. Welcome to Swasti Diaries, where we dissect the anatomy of crimes that the shadows try to hide. I am your narrator, and tonight, we peel back the layers of a murder disguised as folklore. As I step closer, the scent of damp earth is overpowered by something faint, an antiseptic, clinical tang that has no business in these woods. Detective Eris Thorne stands at the perimeter, his boots sinking into the soft mud. He ignores the frantic, hushed whispers of the townsfolk gathering behind the police tape. They are already pointing fingers toward the cottage on the ridge, whispering about the woman who gathers herbs and keeps to herself, Clara. They call her a witch because they fear what they cannot explain. But Eris isn't looking at the sky for curses. He is looking at the victim's wrists. There is no bruising, no defensive flailing, just the clean surgical puncture of a needle entry point near the carotid artery. This wasn't a ritual. This was an execution, performed by someone with a steady hand and a medical kit. The silence of the woods is heavy, broken only by the rhythmic click of his camera shutter, documenting the impossible geometry of a death that was never meant to be solved. Eris kneels in the damp loam, his knees soaking up the cold moisture. He ignores the muttering crowd behind the yellow tape, a cacophony of superstition that he has learned to tune out like static on a radio. He reaches for the victim's left hand, his gloved fingers tracing the pale, undisturbed skin of the knuckles. No grit, no soil under the fingernails. If this man had fought, if he had even struggled for a single second against his captor, the forest floor would be torn, and his hands would be stained with the evidence of a desperate, final battle. But there is nothing, just a pristine, terrifying stillness. The victim's clothes are neatly pressed, the buttons aligned. It is as if he were dressed for a formal dinner rather than a brutal end. Eris shifts his focus to the victim's neck, pulling a small high-intensity penlight from his tactical vest. The beam cuts through the gloom, illuminating a singular microscopic puncture mark just below the jawline, a needle track. He exhales, the breath curling into a white mist. This is not the work of a local herbalist casting spells. This requires sterile equipment, a precise dosage, and the cold anatomical knowledge of where the jugular vein hides. He stands up, his joints popping in the silence, and turns to the crowd. He scans their faces, looking for a flicker of recognition, but they avoid his gaze, their eyes darting toward the distant, jagged silhouette of the ridge where Clara's cottage sits, tucked away like a tumor. They want this to be magic. They want a monster to blame so they can sleep at night. Eris knows better. Monsters don't use medical-grade paralytics. Monsters have bank accounts, motives, and the reach to make a man disappear without leaving a single bruise. The climb to the ridge is steep, the air growing thinner and colder as the trees press closer. Eris reaches the cottage door, the wood weathered and gray, and pushes it open without knocking. Inside, the space does not smell of incense or dried sage. It smells of copper, ethanol, and sterile, sharp chemicals. He steps over the threshold, his boots clicking on the uneven floorboards. The room is a testament to impossible order. Rows of glass vials are lined up with military precision, each labeled with precise, handwritten chemical formulas, not occult symbols. A centrifuge hums in the corner, a relic of a laboratory long abandoned. Clara stands by a stainless steel workbench, her hands steady as she uses a pipette to transfer a translucent, viscous fluid. She doesn't look up. Eris watches her, noting the way her fingers move. Fluid, practiced, and lacking the tremor of a person hiding behind spells. He pulls a small plastic evidence bag from his pocket, holding it out. Inside is the microscopic fiber he lifted from the crime scene. A fragment of synthetic mesh. He watches her eyes flick toward it, then back to her work. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't offer a defense. Instead, she gestures to a shelf of tinctures, her voice barely a whisper. "They come to me when the town doctor refuses to see them because they cannot pay," she says, her gaze fixed on the beaker. "I do not use magic, detective. I use chemistry. I use the tools the world forgot to give them." Eris looks around, his eyes locking onto a ledger tucked beneath a heavy medical textbook. The entries are meticulous, documenting dosages and patient names, but the final entry is different. A list of chemical compounds, including the very paralytic agent that stopped the victim's heart. The room goes deadly quiet. The hum of the centrifuge feels like a ticking clock. Eris steps closer, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He reaches for the ledger, his fingers brushing against the cold, leather-bound spine. He flips the pages, past the lists of fever reducers and saline solutions, until he finds the entry. It is written in a sharp, slanted hand, dated the night of the murder. The compound is listed clearly, a complex chemical structure that mirrors the toxicology report he received from the coroner this morning. The room temperature seems to drop as the reality settles in. This was not a ritualistic killing. There were no jagged wounds, no frantic struggle, no desperate clawing at the oak bark. The victim was paralyzed, rendered a statue while still fully conscious. He looks at Clara, who finally sets down her pipette. Her eyes are not those of a murderer, but of someone who has seen the gears of a much larger, darker machine. "You didn't kill him," Eris says, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that cuts through the silence. "But you know exactly who did. This compound. It isn't something you buy at a local apothecary. It requires a high-level medical license, a cold storage transit, and a surgical hand to administer without leaving a bruise." Clara finally looks at him, her face a pale mask of exhaustion. She points to the entry in the ledger, a series of initials that Eris recognizes from the town's municipal budget reports. The mayor. The realization hits him with the force of a physical blow. The curse was a smokescreen, a ghost story told to keep the townspeople blinded, while the mayor purged the only witness capable of dismantling his empire. Eris closes the ledger. The hum of the centrifuge stops abruptly, leaving the room in a silence so thick it feels suffocating. The hunt has shifted, from a search for a phantom witch to the pursuit of a man who owns the very ground they stand on. The interrogation room is a sterile box of gray concrete and humming fluorescent lights. Mayor Elias Vance sits across from me, his posture a carefully practiced display of civic concern. He wears an expensive charcoal gray suit that seems entirely out of place in this windowless, suffocating space. He leans forward, his hands resting on the metal table, but I see it. A faint, rhythmic tremor in his right index finger. He taps the table, a nervous, erratic beat against the cold steel. "Detective," he begins, his voice smooth, practiced, and utterly hollow. "I understand your fascination with the archives. But surely, you don't intend to waste our time chasing the delusions of a woman who spends her nights mixing potions in a shed." He pauses, his gaze locking onto mine with the predatory stillness of a man who has never lost a fight. Clara is a convenient scapegoat, isn't she? Her isolation, her strange equipment. The town is already whispering. Why complicate a simple matter of a tragic, superstitious accident? I slide the ledger across the table. His eyes flicker toward the binding, a momentary lapse in his composure. He doesn't touch it. He refuses to acknowledge the evidence that links his own municipal warehouse to the synthetic residue found on the oak. Instead, he shifts his weight, the chair legs scraping harshly against the floor. He begins to talk faster now, his defensive walls rising brick by brick. He describes Clara's movements, fabricating details about her presence near the woods that night. Every word is a calculated deflection. He is not just defending his reputation. He is protecting a legacy built on illegal timber and the silence of a dead man. I watch his hands. The tremor is worse now. He is losing the rhythm of his own lie. The ledger is heavy, bound in cracked, oil-stained leather that smells of damp earth and neglect. My fingers trace the entries, inked in a hurried, nervous hand. These aren't just records of local land disputes. They are receipts of betrayal. The victim, Julian, hadn't just been a partner to Mayor Vance. He had been an accomplice, until the conscience kicked in. I flipped to the final pages. The numbers are staggering: millions in illegal timber extraction, funneled through a shell company registered under the very warehouse where I found that synthetic lubricant. It wasn't a curse. It was a liquidation. The witchcraft narrative was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Vance knew this town. He knew how easily they would turn their fear toward a recluse like Clara. He didn't just kill Julian. He weaponized the town's ignorance to bury the truth. I looked back at the mayor. He is still talking, his voice a rhythmic drone of practiced excuses, but the thread of his story has snapped. I take a slow breath, feeling the weight of the evidence pressing against my palms. The forensic reality is clear. The surgical-grade paralytic agent found in Julian's system doesn't come from a garden shed. It comes from high-level medical suppliers, the kind of supply chain only someone with municipal power can access without leaving a paper trail. I watch him shift again. The tremor in his finger has moved to his jaw. He is realizing the ledger isn't just a document, it is a guillotine. The silence in the room deepens, thick with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. I don't need to shout. The truth is already screaming in the gaps of his silence. He thought he was untouchable. But he forgot that paper doesn't bleed, and it never forgets. The laboratory light hums, a steady, annoying frequency that cuts through the sterile air. I focus on the slide under the microscope. The bark samples from the ancient oak. They were supposed to be just wood and lichen. Instead, the high magnification lens reveals a smear of something else. A viscous, amber-hued residue. I adjust the focus dial, my fingers steady despite the mounting pressure. Under the polarized light, it glows with a synthetic, unnatural sheen. This isn't sap. It is a complex polyalphalofin lubricant, the kind used exclusively for heavy-duty industrial hydraulic systems. My mind traces the path back to the mayor's warehouse, the one he claimed was for community storage. The chemical composition matches the specific batch of lubricant used in the heavy timber harvesters parked behind his facility. It is a bridge of evidence. One end is anchored in the deep, fibrous grooves of that oak tree, the other firmly in the mayor's private, restricted sector. I lean back, the chair groaning under the weight of the realization. The paralytic was the how, a clean, professional injection that left Julian breathless and immobile. But this lubricant? This is the why. It is the mechanical fingerprint of a crime that was never meant to be solved. I think of the ledger again, the way the numbers aligned with the harvest dates. The mayor didn't just kill a man. He murdered his own liability. The silence in the room isn't empty anymore. It is heavy, dense with the crushing weight of a truth that is finally, irrevocably unspooling. I pick up the evidence bag, the plastic crinkling like a warning. The game is over. The forensic trail is no longer a suggestion. It is a map leading directly to the mayor's front door. I don't need a confession. I have the science. The air outside the lab is thick with the scent of wood smoke and impending violence. I step out into the town square, and the silence I left behind in the office is shattered. A low, rhythmic chanting rises from the crowd, a dissonant, guttural sound that vibrates against the storefront windows. They are gathering near the town hall, brandishing torches that flicker like jagged, orange teeth against the twilight. Mayor Vance stands on the balcony, his silhouette framed by the harsh glare of floodlights, his hands outstretched in a calculated display of grief. He is pointing toward the edge of town, toward the small, secluded cottage where Clara hides. The mob is a singular, shifting organism now, driven by a narrative of witchcraft that Vance has meticulously crafted. I push through the periphery of the crowd, my coat collar turned up to hide my badge. The heat from the torches is intense, drying the skin on my face. A man beside me spits, his eyes wide and unfocused, his knuckles white as he grips a heavy iron rod. She took his breath. He whispers the words jagged. She took his soul. He doesn't know about the lubricant. He doesn't know about the ledger. He only knows the story he was sold. I reach my car, the keys fumbling in my pocket. A metallic, desperate jingle. If they reach Clara before I do, the evidence in my pocket will be the only thing left of a truth that will burn to ash. The engine roars to life, a sharp mechanical protest against the stillness of the street. I have to drive through the chaos, weave between the encroaching shadows, and reach the cottage before the first stone is thrown. Every second is a luxury I no longer possess. The tires of my sedan crunch over dry pine needles, far from the town square's manufactured outrage. I kill the lights. The darkness here is absolute. A heavy, suffocating weight that presses against the windshield. I step out, my boots sinking into the damp earth, and pull the high-intensity forensic flashlight from my belt. The beam cuts through the gloom like a scalpel, revealing the twisted, gnarled roots of the ancient oaks. I am tracking the path, not the one the townsfolk use for their ghost stories, but a narrow, disturbed trail of flattened moss leading toward the industrial sector of the forest. My light catches a glint of metal, a discarded casing half buried in the mud. I crouch, my knees protesting against the cold, and sweep the beam across the surrounding brush. There, hidden beneath a rotting tarpaulin, lies a collection of crates. I peel back the plastic. The smell hits me instantly. Antiseptic, sterile, and entirely out of place in this decay. Rows of vials, glass syringes, and surgical-grade rubber tubing sit in perfect, orderly lines. My hand trembles just a fraction as I lift a singular needle from the cache. The plunger is still locked in place. The residue at the tip is a sticky, amber-colored compound, identical to the synthetic lubricant I found on the bark of the murder tree. This wasn't a ritual. It was a sterile medical execution, performed by someone who viewed the victim not as a soul to be sacrificed, but as a biological variable to be erased. I bag the evidence, the crinkle of the plastic loud in the stillness. Somewhere a branch snaps, a sharp percussive sound that tears through the silence. I am not alone. I turn the light, the beam dancing across the dark, waiting for the flicker of a shadow that doesn't belong to the trees. The office door swings open with a heavy rhythmic thud. Mayor Elias Vance sits behind a mahogany desk that spans the width of the room, his silhouette framed by the harsh, artificial glow of the city lights outside. He does not look up. He is pouring a glass of amber liquid, the ice clinking against the crystal with a sound like shattering glass. I walk forward, my boots clicking against the polished hardwood, a sharp, invasive rhythm in the dead of the night. I don't wait for an invitation. I reach into my coat pocket and place the evidence bag on his desk. The plastic crackles. The needle inside catches the light, a silver sliver of truth that cuts through the atmosphere of the room. I watch his jaw tighten, a subtle, involuntary muscle spasm near his ear. He finally looks up, his eyes cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of remorse. He pushes the glass aside. He doesn't deny it. Instead, he leans forward, his voice a low, gravelly hum that vibrates in the small space between us. He speaks of the town as if it were a fragile organism, something that requires pruning to survive. He calls the victim a liability, a loose thread that threatened to unravel the entire tapestry of his legacy. He believes he is the architect of stability, and that my discovery is merely an inconvenience to be managed. As he justifies the cold, calculated injection, I press the button on the digital recorder hidden in my palm. The red light blinks, a tiny, steady pulse that documents the end of his reign. He thinks he is in control. He thinks he can talk his way out of the math, the chemistry, and the cold, hard logic of the evidence. He is wrong. The silence that follows his confession is heavy, thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and the finality of a life sentence. The confession hangs in the air, a toxic vapor filling the room, more potent than the bourbon he clutches. Mayor Vance does not look like a man who has lost. He looks like a man who has finished a tiresome task. He leans back, the leather of his chair groaning under his weight. He begins to speak of the victim, not as a martyr but as a business partner, the activist, the man pinned to the oak tree. He wasn't a hero. He was a broker. He was the one who scouted the protected land, marked the trees, and facilitated the bribes. But greed is a bottomless pit. He wanted more. He wanted the lion's share of the logging profits, or he would go to the press. The curse was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. By using the town's ancient, irrational fear of the forest, Vance ensured that no one would dare approach the crime scene. They wouldn't touch the body. They wouldn't call for a coroner. They would leave the evidence to the rain and the rot. He laughs then, a dry, rasping sound. He explains that he didn't need a ritual. He needed a distraction. The paralytic wasn't chosen for its cruelty, but for its surgical efficiency. It ensured the man didn't struggle, didn't make a sound, and left no signs of a fight that would suggest a human killer. The forest was the stage, and the townspeople were the unwitting audience, playing their parts in a tragedy written by a man in a tailored suit. I look at the digital recorder. The red light is still blinking. The mayor's ego has betrayed him. He didn't just confess to a murder. He detailed the blueprint of a conspiracy that spans decades. The logic is now undeniable. The motive, the means, and the calculated staging of the scene, all laid bare in the sterile, air-conditioned silence of his office. The digital recorder sits on the mahogany desk, a tiny black monolith capturing the end of an era and the start of a conviction. Mayor Vance watches me, his eyes devoid of remorse, his posture relaxed. He assumes the power dynamic is still in his favor. He is wrong. I pull the toxicology report from my inner jacket pocket, the paper crisp, the ink sharp. It isn't just a list of chemical compounds. It is a map of a cold-blooded execution. I cross-reference the paralytic agent, a specialized neuromuscular blocker, against the regional pharmaceutical distribution logs I pulled from the state vault this morning. The logic is a closing vice. Vance's private clinic, registered as a charitable front for his logging employees, received a shipment of this exact substance 3 weeks ago. The logs are signed by his personal physician, a man who disappears from town records every time a new land grab project begins. I look at the numbers. The dose found in the victim's system matches the vial count missing from that shipment. Precisely. There is no magic here. No ancient curse. Just a ledger, a vial of clear liquid, and a man who thought his bank account could buy him immunity from the laws of physics and justice. The mystery of the witch's touch dissolves into the reality of a syringe. I watch Vance's fingers, they twitch just once against the leather chair. The realization isn't hitting him like a blow. It is settling in like a frost. He knows the timeline is locked. He knows the forensic chain of custody is unbroken. I stand up, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like grinding teeth. The air in the room feels different now. Thinner. The confession is not just words anymore. It is evidence. The case of the Oak Haven activist wasn't a tragedy of the supernatural. It was a corporate audit written in blood. Vance bolts. He moves with the desperate speed of a cornered animal, his boots thudding against the mahogany floor before he hits the heavy oak doors of the study. I am right behind him. The air outside is biting. A sharp autumn wind that carries the scent of wet pine and distant wood smoke. We spill into the town square, where the evening fog clings to the cobblestones like a shroud. The town elders are gathered near the cenotaph, their faces etched with the expectation of a ritualistic resolution. Vance stumbles, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy iron gate, but I catch his shoulder. I don't pull him back. I lock him in place. The crowd falls silent. The only sound is the rhythmic clicking of my boots on stone. I reach into my coat and pull out the ledger, not a book of shadows but a book of accounts. I throw the toxicology report onto the cold, damp base of the oak tree. The paper flutters white against the dark, jagged bark. The elders crowd in, their eyes darting from the clinical, typed font of the report to the mayor's trembling hands. The witch's curse, a story built on fear, is dying in the cold night air. I point at the ledger, at the entries documenting the illegal logging, at the specific date the paralytic was ordered. There is no magic here, I say, my voice cutting through the fog. Only a calculated transaction. The crowd shifts. The confusion in their eyes is replaced by a slow, simmering realization. Vance looks at the tree, then at the people he once controlled with superstition. He knows the game is over. The silence is absolute, heavy with the weight of cold, hard facts. Vance's knees buckle, his expensive wool coat dragging through the mud as I snap the cuffs around his wrists. The metal clicks, a sharp mechanical sound that signals the end of his reign. He doesn't struggle. He simply stares at the ledger, his face a mask of hollow resignation. The townspeople move closer, their hands no longer clutching protective charms, but reaching out to touch the forensic reports as if they were holy relics. They are reading the numbers, the chemical names, the cold, hard logic that strips away their fear. Clara stands at the edge of the circle. The light from a nearby lantern catches the silver in her hair, highlighting the quiet dignity she kept while they called her a witch. She doesn't gloat. She simply watches as the mayor is led toward the patrol car, his head bowed, his influence dissolving in the damp night air. The oak tree, once a site of supposed supernatural terror, is now just a tree again, a witness to a common crime. I hand the remaining evidence files to the deputy, my fingers stiff from the cold. As the siren begins to wail, cutting through the silence of Oakhaven, the fog seems to thin, revealing the truth beneath. The town will change tomorrow. They will trade their myths for questions and their silence for transparency. My job here is finished, but the weight of the truth remains. I look at the tree one last time, noting the jagged bark where the victim was pinned, and then I walk away, leaving the history of this place to be rewritten by the facts. The engine of my sedan hums against the gravel as I pull away from the perimeter of Oakhaven. In the rearview mirror, the ancient oak tree shrinks into the darkness, a silent, gnarled sentinel that stood witness to a tragedy born not of curses, but of spreadsheets and industrial greed. I reach over to the passenger seat and pull the case file toward me. I flip the metal clasp, hearing the sharp, final snap of the folder closing. Inside, the documents are crisp, clinical, and devoid of the supernatural. There is no magic in this case. Only the sterile chemical reality of a paralytic agent, the calculated geometry of a murder, and the cold ink of a ledger that traded a human life for land development permits. It is easy to blame the shadows. It is comfortable to point toward the woods and whisper about rituals when the truth demands that we look at our neighbors, our leaders, and our own complicity. We hide behind myths because the alternative, that a man can kill for a profit margin, is far more terrifying than any ghost. The fog is lifting now, retreating into the valley, leaving behind a town that must wake up to the sunlight of hard facts. I leave the file on the seat, a collection of papers that stripped a monster of his mask. The road stretches ahead, long and indifferent. My work here is done, but the lesson lingers like the scent of ozone after a storm. We must stop hunting for monsters in the trees and start looking for them in the boardrooms and the offices where the real damage is done. Thank you for walking through this investigation with me. If you value the truth over the myth, subscribe to Swasti Diaries and join us as we continue to peel back the layers of the world's most calculated crimes.